She had been locked inside a cage, and the world only found out after one final photo was sent to the FBI. No name, no sender. Cassidy Rainwater vanished as if she had never existed. No dramatic goodbye. No one could say for sure when they last saw her. Only silence, and a cabin hidden deep in the Missouri woods, where even the sound of falling leaves seemed to be keeping secrets. Nearly 2 months after she disappeared, the FBI received a chilling envelope. Inside were a series of disturbing photos. A woman chained inside a metal cage, her body marked by restraints. Her eyes, empty, resigned. The photos were sealed in a plain brown envelope. No return address, no fingerprints, no message. But one thing was undeniable. The woman in those photos was Cassidy. And from that moment on, every assumption about her disappearance began to fall apart. What happened between the last time Cassidy was seen and the moment those photographs arrived? Cassidy Rainwater lived on the outskirts of Lebanon, Missouri, a small town where folks still know each other's names, but no one really knows each other. Her cabin sat at the end of a muddy dirt road, surrounded by pine trees and rocky slopes, just far enough that no one would hear you scream, if you ever did. She once dreamed simple dreams, opening a little bakery, living close to her aging mother, and raising her son in peace. But one by one, those dreams slipped through her fingers, like a porcelain mug falling to a kitchen floor, shattered with no sound. Cassidy had studied culinary arts. She worked as a baker. She had a family once. But after her mother died of cancer, Cassidy began to spiral, slipping deeper into isolation and despair. Her family broke apart. Her son went to live with his father. Cassidy left Springfield and moved into her mother's old cabin, a place once filled with laughter and the smell of fresh bread. Now it held only echoes. She had no steady job. She picked up odd gigs, yard work, kitchen help, fixing leaky roofs. Some said Cassidy was the kind of person who gets taken advantage of. Soft-spoken, kind-hearted, always looking to be needed. In the summer of 2021, she started talking to James Phelps, a man who lived nearby, known for keeping to himself and being a little strange. Cassidy eventually moved into his home, saying she just needed time to get back on her feet. No one really knew what their relationship was. Maybe friends, or maybe just two lonely people sharing a roof. In Lebanon, Cassidy didn't have many friends, but those few who spoke with her remembered something in her eyes. Gentle but distant, like she was already living in another world, or had quietly given up on this one. If you asked someone, when exactly did Cassidy disappear, no one could say for sure. One friend last texted her in mid-July. A neighbor thought they saw her watering plants in early August, but no one knew for certain. No one remembered clearly, and that, from the very beginning, was the first red flag. People who are easily forgotten often disappear without a sound. Cassidy lived so far off the grid, it took nearly 6 weeks before anyone reported her missing. It wasn't until a close friend grew truly concerned and called the police. When officers questioned James Phelps, the man Cassidy was believed to be staying with, he told them she'd left in the middle of the night, hitching a ride to Colorado. No note, no goodbye. At the time, police had no reason to doubt him. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of foul play. And Cassidy was an adult. Legally, she could go wherever she wanted, but her best friend didn't buy it. She knew Cassidy would never leave without a word to her son, so she launched her own search. She emailed every place Cassidy had worked. She posted missing person alerts on Facebook. She reached out to people who knew James Phelps. And then, something strange happened. A mysterious photo set was sent to the FBI. Inside were images of Cassidy, locked in a metal cage, a wooden ceiling, concrete floor, a hook dangling from a meat hoist, the kind used in slaughterhouses, cold white light, and Cassidy's eyes, blurred, fading, like no one had seen her as a person in a very long time. There was no ransom note, no demands, no explanation. There was one thing even Cassidy's closest loved ones didn't know. She had been imprisoned in the very house where people thought she was only staying. On August 25, 2021, nearly 6 weeks after anyone had heard from Cassidy, a close friend officially reported her missing. She told police Cassidy would never stay gone this long without saying something. Her voice on that call wasn't angry, just tired, anxious, and carrying a quiet expectation that she wouldn't be believed. The Dallas County Sheriff's Office took the case, but treated it as routine. They started with a phone call to the last known person who'd seen Cassidy, James Phelps. When deputies arrived at Phelps' cabin, a secluded property deep in the woods, he appeared cooperative. They found a thin, gray-haired man with a blank stare and knee-high weeds swallowing his backyard. Phelps told them Cassidy had stayed with him for a few weeks that summer, but had left in the middle of the night in late July. He claimed she was having family issues and seemed like she just wanted to disappear. Phelps had no proof she left, no surveillance footage, no witnesses, no texts. But he said she caught a ride with someone headed toward Colorado. It was a story that sounded just believable enough to be suspicious. Police took down his statement and left. No search warrant. No suspect. For the time being, Cassidy Rainwater was classified as missing under unknown circumstances. A label easy to lose in a system already stretched thin, but not everyone gave up. That same friend, the one who filed the report, kept digging. She combed through Phelps' Facebook page, messaged Cassidy's old contacts, reached out to shelters and support centers. And then, 3 weeks later, a brown envelope arrived at the FBI. No return address, sealed with silver duct tape. Inside was a memory card. The first image opened, and the room went silent. Cassidy Rainwater, shackled inside a metal cage, bruises across her face, one arm twisted behind her back, harsh fluorescent lights beaming from above, cold, clinical, like a slaughterhouse. No blood, no screams, just the feeling that whatever happened had happened a long time ago. The image didn't just show something terrible, it proved it. The FBI contacted the Dallas County Sheriff immediately. This time, they didn't ask questions. They brought a search warrant. James Phelps's cabin was buried nearly 2 miles off the main road. No house number, no mailbox, no internet. Outside, it looked forgotten by time. A rusted-out pickup, scattered garden tools, a decaying front porch held up by a rotting post. As agents and deputies approached, Phelps stood at the door. He didn't ask why they were there. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word. Inside, everything felt frozen. No signs of a struggle, no blood on the floor. But the air was heavy, so thick it almost had a shape. There was the smell of metal, of damp rot, and a stench so foul one investigator had to step outside. The unmistakable scent of decomposition. In the kitchen refrigerator, they found 6 packages of meat, wrapped in parchment and labeled 724. A technician asked, "What kind of meat is this?" Phelps said nothing. Out back, they discovered a hoist, the kind used on hunting properties to hang and clean game. Below it were dark brown stains baked into the ground. But the biggest discovery was a second memory card, hidden beneath the floorboards. It held 7 more photographs, all of Cassidy. In one, she's lying on her side in the cage, her eyes half open, like she's still trying to see something. Another shows a metal hook descending, grazing her forehead. And the last image, a woman's body suspended in the air. No head, no arms, just legs, and a purple anklet still clinging to what was left. Every theory about Cassidy walking away on her own was gone. But what no one expected was that there was a second man behind it all, and he wouldn't even be suspected until he made the first move. When investigators searched James Phelps' electronics, they didn't just find photos. Hidden behind an air purifier, they discovered an external hard drive, and on it, a series of manually saved messages. They weren't from any typical messaging app. The texts looked like they'd been copied from an encrypted platform, each with a timestamp but no names attached. Still, the way they were written made one thing clear. Phelps hadn't acted alone. One name showed up repeatedly in the message thread, Tim, often alongside lines like, "She'll be easy, skinny, don't make a mess. 7/24 is the date. Got enough cold storage ready?" The final message, dated July 23rd, read simply, "We still on?" The FBI traced phone contacts and recent connections and uncovered Timothy Norton, a former military man, long-haul truck driver, and someone who had briefly rented a room behind Phelps's cabin earlier that summer. When first questioned, Norton seemed confused. But after 12 hours, no sleep, no lawyer, no phone, he said a sentence that froze the entire room. "I know you've seen the pictures." When asked, "Do you know what happened to Cassidy Rainwater?" Norton didn't respond right away. He bowed his head, rubbed his hands together, and finally said slowly, "I didn't think it would go this far, but then it just kept going." What came next would drag the investigation into a darkness no one was prepared for. Norton confessed that on the night of July 24th, Phelps called him to the cabin. Cassidy was asleep, lying on the floor barefoot. Phelps said, "It's time." Norton claimed he stood frozen for what felt like hours. Then he walked over, placed a fabric bag over Cassidy's head, knelt on her body, and held her down. She struggled, let out a muffled cry, but within seconds, it was over. Norton said Phelps checked for a pulse, nodded, and then dragged her body out back. The hoist was already waiting. The two men moved like machines, undressing her, tying off each joint, stringing her up like wild game after a hunt. I don't know why I did it," Norton said. "I couldn't feel anything anymore." The biggest question that haunted both the FBI and the public was simple, yet impossible. Why? Why kidnap, imprison, kill, and dismember a woman who had done nothing wrong? No conflict, no money owed, no twisted romance. No one could give a clear answer. Phelps remained silent. Norton spoke only in riddles. Things just got out of hand. But buried inside an internal FBI report was one chilling line. "We cannot rule out the possibility of a thrill kill, an act driven by the desire for power and domination. There is no evidence of sexual abuse or financial coercion. The primary motive appears to be absolute control, followed by complete destruction." And yet, if everything was that clear, why, for nearly 2 months, did no one realize Cassidy was still trapped? While the world believed she had simply walked away, it's been over 2 years since the FBI received those haunting photos of Cassidy Rainwater. And still, no one knows for sure who sent them. The envelope had no fingerprints, no DNA, no clear postmark. The only thing investigators are certain of is that without that envelope, this case might have stayed in the shadows forever, filed away as just another cold, unexplained disappearance. That's why one question still haunts many in law enforcement. Was there someone else, a third person, who saw what happened and chose to break the silence? A retired FBI agent once told reporters, "We had a gut feeling that the person who sent those images was on the inside. Maybe someone who helped and then realized they couldn't live with it." That theory has never been confirmed, but it adds a chilling depth to the case. The idea that, somewhere in the darkness, Cassidy may have had one last ally, someone, late as it was, who tried to give her back a voice through a single, silent photo. That detail continues to haunt people, because it suggests, even in the heart of unspeakable cruelty, there was still a sliver of human conscience. But from that same space, a darker twist quietly emerges. If someone did send those photos and knew what had happened, why didn't they come forward sooner? What were they waiting for? No one has an answer. After James Phelps was arrested, a wave of new witnesses slowly came forward. One woman, who used to live near the cabin, said she'd visited years earlier to buy a used item. The moment she arrived, she felt something was deeply wrong. The silence was unnatural, as if someone was watching from the shadows. She left quickly, but remembered Phelps had vacant eyes and grease on his hands, though there were no tools in sight. Another witness, an old acquaintance from another state, told authorities that Phelps had a history of animal abuse and liked to hang disturbing photos in his darkroom. Local deputies had even received anonymous complaints in past years, reports of strange noises coming from the cabin, but no search warrant was ever issued. They claimed there was no probable cause. Cassidy's case forced authorities to re-examine Phelps's entire history, and the truth emerged. At least 3 times in the past 5 years, neighbors had filed reports about him. Each time, the claims were dismissed. Lack of evidence. One leaked line from an internal report sparked public outrage. No one thought an older white man living in a quiet rural town could do something like this. It was unconscious bias, but it cost lives. If Cassidy Rainwater had been a well-connected woman from a powerful family, would police have acted faster? If James Phelps had been a black man with a criminal record, would that cabin have been searched in the first week? The final, most chilling twist isn't about a killer hiding in plain sight. It's that we already knew these things, and somehow we let them happen again. And just when it seemed everything had been uncovered, one small detail shattered every theory. When forensic teams examined the remains found on Phelps' property, one disturbing detail forced everything back into question. The cuts weren't consistent. One forensic examiner said, some incisions were clean, made with a sharp blade, but others were rough, torn, like a different tool was used. That inconsistency led to a chilling question. Were more than 2 people involved in what happened to Cassidy? That suspicion grew deeper when one of the recovered body parts, found outside the cabin, stuffed inside an old container, was still wearing a purple bracelet. Her best friend confirmed. She never took that bracelet off. So if the bracelet was still there, why was the arm somewhere else? Investigators began to ask the unthinkable. Were all the remains actually Cassidy's? They ordered a full DNA analysis, and the results silenced the room. One of the bone fragments, nearly shattered, found in the ashes behind the cabin, did not belong to Cassidy Rainwater. The DNA matched a woman from an unsolved missing persons case in 2007, from a town just 50 miles away. That single discovery cracked everything open. The FBI reopened cold cases across the Ozarks, looking at every unsolved disappearance in the region from the past 20 years. The results were staggering. Within a 100-mile radius of Phelps's cabin, at least 9 women had gone missing. Most were poor, homeless, living on the margins. None of them made the news. No major search parties. No TV interviews. No hashtags. They disappeared and were forgotten, like they had never existed. A former FBI agent put it plainly, we're not saying all of them are connected, but this data, it's not random. And so, a darker theory began to emerge, that Phelps's cabin wasn't just the site of a single horrific crime. It may have been a hub, a staging ground, part of something far larger and far more methodical. Some in the community began calling it what it felt like, a hunting ground, a place where predators operated freely, because they knew no one would come looking, no one would ask questions, and no one would care. Trust in the system began to crack. Then, in April 2022, a new envelope arrived at the FBI office in Kansas City. No return name, no listed recipient. But this time, inside was a handwritten letter. The tone was conflicted, angry, but remorseful. No signature. But the writer claimed to be someone who once lived in the dark with them. The letter read, I saw them bring the woman in. I couldn't stop it. I knew what was going to happen, and I said nothing. But when they passed the photo around, I took it, and I sent it. Don't believe everything Phelps says. There's something deeper, and I'm afraid they're still out there. FBI analysts tested the paper, handwriting, and DNA, but the sender remains unknown. Still, the letter raised the question all over again. Phelps and Norton were in custody. The cabin was sealed, but the writer said they, not just he. Who were they? Was this a network, not just 2 men? The community asked, then quickly went quiet, buried under fear and helplessness. Because if someone else is still out there, where are they now? What began as a single missing person case had now exposed something deeper, more disturbing about America itself. A country where, even if you vanish, no one notices fast enough to save you. Cassidy's family refuses to believe she was just a random victim. Her best friend, in a final interview, said, I believe someone knows. I believe someone walked into that cabin, walked back out, and is still out there. Trust, the last thing anyone had left, is starting to fracture. Trust in the justice system. Trust in the truth. Trust that the right people were even caught. And one final question lingers, unspoken but present in everyone's mind. If those photos had never been sent, if no one had come forward, where would the story have ended? But this still isn't the end. Because after all the clues, all the horror, all the unanswered questions, the only thing that's clear is that Cassidy was forgotten long before she ever disappeared. Cassidy Rainwater, a name that sounds like a sad song, was once a daughter, a mother, a baker, and a woman who only wanted a quiet life. But piece by piece, her world was carried off by the wind. Like autumn leaves, no one bothers to pick up. They say, people are only searched for once they're missed. But who went searching for Cassidy For 6 weeks, no one knocked on her door. No one asked questions. No headlines. No news alerts. She disappeared, silently, and was assumed to have just left. She wasn't believed. She wasn't investigated properly. No one said her name long enough to remember she ever existed. It wasn't until the photo, until the pain had a face, that people finally began to accept she was real. And that is the most heartbreaking part. It took a metal cage for the world to see her as human. Inside the old house Cassidy returned to, hoping to start over, a calendar still hangs, frozen in time. The last date circled in red, July 17th, 1 week before she was killed. In that box, she'd written, "Bake apple pie for Mrs. Henderson, 3 p.m. No one ate that pie. No one ever came to pick it up. All that remained was an empty kitchen and an oven that would never turn on again. The case of Cassidy Rainwater is closed, legally. James Phelps and Timothy Norton were charged, convicted, and will never see freedom again. But something still lingers. Not in files, but in the tightness in your chest when you say her name out loud. The sense that Cassidy stands in for thousands of others who vanished quietly, were misjudged, and were left behind by a system that never saw them as believable. The feeling that we, even unintentionally, were part of that silence. We like to think evil wears a terrifying face, that it comes with weapons or brilliant plans. But sometimes it's just a quiet cabin in the woods, a neighbor who still says good morning. And sometimes complicity doesn't come from what we do, but from what we don't do. There was no grand funeral for Cassidy, no sea of candles, no national moment of silence. Just one friend, the one who called in her disappearance, standing quietly outside the old wooden house. In her hand, the purple bracelet, the only thing that survived. She didn't cry. She simply told a reporter they thought she didn't matter, but she was someone's whole world. And maybe what Cassidy left behind wasn't just a horrific case, but a mirror. A mirror we now have to look into and ask ourselves, is someone around me slowly disappearing and I haven't even noticed?